Yesterday morning, a new website appeared out of thin air called Stallman-report.org. This website, a single page, a very lengthy single page, dubbed the Stallman Report, is what appears to be a very, very bizarre hit piece on Richard Stallman, the founder of the Free Software Foundation and the GNU Project. The author or authors of this report, again, we're going to go into some of the detail here, have decided to keep their identities completely secret and anonymous, which is bizarre considering there is no leaked or sensitive material inside this report, and I can't for the life of me figure out a good reason to stay anonymous. We'll get into that in a little bit. The entire report has extraordinarily strong political language. It was clearly very politically motivated and derived. The motivation for writing this report is dubious and questionable. In fact, there are some very good reasons to believe that the motivations are not 100% sincere on this. And in general, it is a hit piece that has the stated intention of canceling an old man with cancer because of his strange views, his strange political beliefs, and admittedly, his very bizarre statements and antics over the years. Now, I want to say before we get into this that I have many criticisms of Richard Stallman. I have talked openly about my criticisms of Richard Stallman, some of which are included in this document, in this Stallman report, and some of which I do agree Richard Stallman should not have said or done some of these things, for sure. I have always said those in public with my face, my voice, my name, my words. I have never hidden my identity as I've said these things. In fact, I have repeatedly said all of my criticism of Richard Stallman to Richard Stallman's face on numerous occasions, oftentimes recorded and presented for the world to enjoy. And I have done so for the better part of the last 15, close to 20 years now. This is no secret. However, this particular document is not a thing of constructive criticism. There are what I would dub to be a bit nefarious intent with this particular document. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan, to say the least. However, it is getting a bit of traction, and I think it deserves to be covered here. So, it's strange. I find myself a person who has regularly criticized Richard Stallman, his behaviors, the things he says, the policies he's advocated for outside of the computing world. A person who's really come down as firmly against many of the things Richard Stallman is for. I'm finding myself defending Richard Stallman here in all of these cases because of this particular document and the way they have crafted it and the very clear bias and very strange motives in all of this. I should also say, before we dive in, I have attempted to reach out to the people involved in Stallman-report.org. They have an anonymous email address you can contact them with. I have done so. I have attempted to reach out to numerous people who seem like might know these individuals. I have not heard back. No response of any kind. That is not terribly surprising. As you go through this with me, you will come away with the clear idea that whoever the person or persons behind this is, they probably don't like me either. And in fact, based on the wording, the structure of the prose, the specific details included, and the political views espoused, if this is multiple people, I have a good indication of who at least one of them is. And yeah, they don't like me much at all. I'm going to read the opening statement here of Stallman Report, dated October 14th, 2024, and then we're going to go on to the rest of it. Richard Stallman, aka RMS, is the founder of GNU and the Free Software Foundation and present-day voting member of the Free Software Foundation Board of Directors and chief nuisance of the GNU project. He is responsible for innumerable contributions to the free software movement, setting its guiding principles, organizing political action, and directly contributing to a flourishing free software ecosystems. The majority of Stallman's political activity has been of priceless value to society at large. And that's where the good words end. The dozens and dozens of pages of hit piece begin. However, quote, Stallman has been the subject of numerous allegations of misconduct. Stallman has also incited numerous controversies for advancing a political agenda which normalizes sexual misconduct and advocates for reforming our social and legal understanding of sexual conduct in a manner which benefits the perpetrators of abuse. I should just say before we continue, because of the content of what we're about to talk about, this episode of the Lunduke Journal would not be appropriate for small children, or people with weak constitutions. Some of it gets a little weird. It gets a little weird because Richard Stallman is a little weird, and the people writing this report seem to be more than a little weird, and so all of it combined together makes this all a bit inappropriate and words I don't normally love saying. On the basis that Stallman has not demonstrated an understanding of his misconduct, has not apologized for allegations of misconduct, alleged or corroborated. Now, notice they say alleged or corroborated, right? They leave it at that. It's just worth noting, continues to publish his harmful political program and does not acknowledge or apologize for harm done in the course of this program. This report reiterates the position that Stallman should be removed from the board of directors at the Free Software Foundation. To support this case, we have cataloged the following. Okay, now I'm going to read the bullet list here. We're not going to read through all the details of all of these. It's way too much. You can read them all if you really want to at stallman-report.org. 1. Primary sources documenting Stallman's political advocacy for the normalization of sexual relations between adults and minors, defense of individuals both accused and convicted of sexual crimes, including the rape of minors, sexual assault, and sexual harassment, dismissal of legal norms regarding sexual assault, dismissal of legal norms regarding sexual harassment, support for the possession of child sexual abuse materials, legal and social normalization of sex between humans and animals, legal and sexual normalization of sex with corpses, necrophilia. And they provide a huge number of links to all of that, to absolutely every single bit of that in Richard Stallman's own words. I mean, they're not wrong. Here's what you need to kind of know about some of this is their statements about Richard Stallman in here are not wrong, right? Like the quotes from Richard himself are actual quotes from Richard himself. He really has talked in the past about how bestiality should not be illegal, right? Right? He has some very extreme, very wild, more than a little wackadoodle ideas. And I have criticized him about many of these things to his face. I'm going to continue here. Number 2, critical allegations of sexual misconduct regarding Stallman. That one is a little bit misleading because the sexual misconduct that is talked about are instances where Richard Stallman clumsily hit on women and failed. And the women did not appreciate it because he was off-putting and weird about it, and they related the stories. And you can read this. There's like 2 or 3 stories in here of that. It's weird, and it's embarrassing for Richard, but it's not. These aren't stories about Richard Stallman, raping someone, right? It's not. It's stories about Richard Stallman being kind of creepy and awkward and weird and being weird with women, right? Like saying weird things as a come on to them, and failing and not pushing it beyond that, according to the stories, just failing and walking away sad. In fact, there's literally a reply from Richard in here where he says, where he agrees that one of these incidents happened where he was hitting on a lady and she rebuffed him and he was sad. And yeah, he was sad because he'd been rebuffed a lot lately. It's embarrassing. All of this is, if I were Richard, I'd be incredibly embarrassed about all this. But when they list as a bullet point credible allegations of sexual misconduct, that's what they mean by that, right? It feels more than a little overblown. Misconduct of the Free Software Foundation Board of Directors, calls from the free software community for Stallman's removal, well, that's irrelevant, and recommendations for reconciliation and closure. All right, now, one thing that needs to be stated really clearly right out front is the authors here have done clearly a ton of work. I'm just going to scroll down so those of you who watch this can see it, because it is an absolutely massive amount of work of quoting things. It's just page after page after page after page of quotes, links to tweets, links to Stallman's website. Most of it is links to Stallman's website where he posted weird things, and they are weird things. I am. And all of these are things like he talks about how, he's a little bit skeptical about certain claims about pedophilia being bad and bestiality and necrophilia and many other things. And in no case is anyone in here saying that Richard Stallman does these things, right? What everyone is talking about, what this Stallman report is talking about, is Richard Stallman musing about the legality of these things. And almost in most cases more as a hypothetical than anything else, right? So are the topics gross? Yeah. Are they topics that I would love to sit down and just discuss around the dinner table? No, they are gross. And do I like the fact that Richard Stallman, as the head of the Free Software Foundation at the time and the head of the GNU project, made a big point of talking about these topics? No, it's gross, and it detracts away from the work of free software and the specifics of the projects like GCC and whatnot that he oversees, and Emacs and all that sort of thing. And I think it's misguided. I think it's weird. Honestly, I find it creepy. I think that it makes me uncomfortable. Like, would I feel comfortable in a room alone with Richard Stallman with a bunch of small children? Honestly, because of all the things he said, probably not. But does that mean he's committed crimes here? No, it doesn't look like it. Not at all. No crimes were committed. He's talked at length about hypothetical things and legal ideals. And this kind of continues on and on throughout this. And all of the statements are made, all of the quotes are from public sources. But for some reason, the authors have elected to keep their identity completely private. And I find that confusing. And let me tell you why. I'm a big supporter, advocate for, and person who assists whistleblowers and people leaking information from corporations and foundations and government organizations. I've done this a huge amount over the last year, and there is real value in anonymity sometimes. In this particular case, they are not leaking information. There's no private confidential information in this Stallman report. Likewise, there is really not much in the way of potential for backlash, right? So if someone wanted to publish a manifesto, a diatribe, an article that was critical of someone, and they were afraid of losing their job or not getting a a future career because of this criticism. That's not really going to happen here. Now, I want to say flat out, I've been critical of Richard Stallman, again, for almost 20 years now. When I first publicly stated many of my criticisms, which are in here, you just heard me talk about a few of them, along with him, picking things off of his feet at conferences and eating them, and on and on and on. I think the show I was doing at the time was the first one to point out that happened. When I was critical of Richard Stallman back then, I got attacked, right? A lot, and many of the people that attacked me for levying the criticism against Stallman about his statements around bestiality, right? I criticized that. I'm like, why would you talk about that when you are running two extraordinarily important projects and foundations from the standpoint of free software? It just is, it's distracting. It's gonna give people ammunition to attack you. It's gonna diminish your credibility in many circles. Like, why would you do that regardless of, anyway? So I criticized Richard to his face, right? In emails back and forth to him, and phone calls and video conference chats, many of which I published, and I criticized him for that, and I got attacked for it. Many of the people who attacked me for it are now the same people who are attacking Richard Stallman for exactly this sort of behavior, which I find fascinating. But what that shows is I hate to use the word climate, but the climate has sort of changed. If you criticize Richard Stallman now, you're not going to lose your job. No one's going to be like, oh, you said something naughty about Stallman. Well, you can't work in the software industry anymore. No, that's not the case. If it ever was the case, it simply is not anymore. In fact, many places, many organizations, you will do better in their organization, in their esteem. You'll be more likely for them to work with you if you're publicly criticizing Stallman. So there really isn't a valid reason that I can think of to remain anonymous. At least not a valid reason that's a good, upstanding one, right? So what it all comes down to is, what is the motivation for this big, lengthy, huge report? Well, let's scroll down here to the end. Let's scroll all the way down. Oh my gosh, it's so long. This is so long. So here we go. We've got recommendations to the GNU project and recommendations to the Free Software Foundation leadership. So this whole thing ends with the recommendations of what they think should happen. Let's read those recommendations, and then let's compare it against a few other facts that are out there that I think start to paint a picture of what exactly is going on here. So recommendations to the Free Software Foundation. Number 1, to voting members. If Richard Stallman fails to step down of his own accord, we urge you to convene a meeting of voting members at the earliest possible occasion in accordance with Section 7 of the FSF bylaws for the purpose of removing Richard Stallman from both voting members and the board of directors. Now, so their statement is Richard Stallman needs to be kicked out of the Free Software Foundation entirely, as in he cannot be a random voting member. Like you and me can become voting members just simply by joining the Free Software Foundation and making a relatively minuscule little financial donation of a couple of bucks. Richard Stallman, according to the people who wrote this, should be prohibited from being allowed to vote like we can vote. Number 2, if Richard Stallman fails to retract his political statements on sexual violence, we encourage you to release a statement denouncing them. And I think this is very critical. Well, this also shows you who these people might be, because Richard Stallman has made a lot of political statements over the years on a ton of topics, and some of them, in my opinion, have been wackadoodle. All over the map. Richard Stallman is a hard left extremist on most issues. Hard left. You'll note that they do not call out Richard Stallman to stop making those political statements, right? No matter how offensive many of them truly are, they simply pinpoint very specific political statements that they feel that they can get traction with, like with necrophilia. No one likes necrophilia, so it's an easy one to win political points with. Yet they do not denounce Richard Stallman making extremist, alienating, and highly offensive political statements that they agree with. Number 3, to all members of the present day voting members and board of directors who were contemporaneous with the 2019 scandal. When they're talking about that, they're basically talking about not kicking Richard Stallman out when they felt like he should be kicked out. And the associated patterns of misconduct. We urge you to step down from your post and allow new leaders to fill your roles, namely, and then they name the 4 people that they feel were positive towards Stallman, who were not kicking out Stallman, who were supportive of Richard Stallman, and they want them out. In particular, we call upon Mr. Nouth to uphold his 2021 campaign pledge to resign as soon as there is a clear path for new leadership, ensuring continuity of the FSF mission. Okay, so they want a complete overhaul of the leadership within the FSF. They do not want the current people who are supportive of Richard Stallman to be in there able to influence it, and they do not want Richard Stallman to be able to vote in those new elections. Interesting. Number 4, leadership is called upon to improve the FSF codes of ethics to prevent future errors of this sort, including the institution of reasonable measures of recourse in the event of violations of the codes of ethics. Okay, so basically they want and institute a far more stringent code of conduct within the Free Software Foundation to provide additional weaponry to use against individuals. We're seeing this in so many open source organizations and foundations and companies nowadays. This is straight out of the standard, hard leftist playbook. I mean, it just is. Number 5, the leadership is called upon to implement a comprehensive program of sexual harassment training within the Free Software Foundation, as well as policies and procedures for handling allegations of sexual harassment. Okay. Number 6, all parties complicit in the platforming of Richard Stallman are encouraged to consider publishing a written apology for their conduct. Okay, now this last one here. All parties complicit in the platforming of Richard Stallman. That includes me. So platforming of Richard Stallman means you allowed him to speak. If you had a conference and he spoke at your conference, you platformed him. If you quoted him in a blog post in any way other than to criticize him, you platformed him. If you did an interview with Richard Stallman, video, podcast, a keynote presentation, whatever, you platformed him. Therefore, you are encouraged to consider publishing a written apology for your conduct. I'm going to say flat out right now to the authors of Stallman-report.org, the anonymous cowards that wrote this, I will not be apologizing for interviewing a significant historical figure within the computer industry. I'm not going to be doing that. That's asinine. And that's kind of a jerk move to try and pressure. And honestly, this reads like bullying people into apologizing simply for speaking to people. That is insane. And I simply won't put up with it. Now, it gets far more interesting, though, because now we've got, we strongly urge you to take these actions in the best interest of the free software community, blah, blah, blah. Recommendations to the GNU, the GNU project, GNU, however you want to say it. To the leadership of the GNU project, we recommend the following steps. Number 1, the removal of Richard Stallman as the chief nuisance, basically the head, right? He's the top dog, the president of the foundation, of the GNU project if he fails to step down of his own accord. 2, replacing the transphobic GNU kind communication guidelines authored by Stallman with a code of conduct which better addresses the needs and safety of the community. Holy heavens, to the broader free software community. If the leadership of the Free Software Foundation fails to account for these problems, we call upon the community to boycott the Free Software Foundation. Consider canceling your membership fees. We also encourage members of the community to voice their support for these calls to action, disseminate our report as broadly as possible, and raise our voices in condemnation of sexual violence and those who protect perpetrators of it. Now, I think it's a pretty fair bet that me, you, and everyone else watching this is against sexual violence and wants to see anyone who perpetrates actual sexual violence, rape, and whatever, to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and preferably put in prison for life. Like I don't mince words about this. However, let's scroll back up just a little bit, because that's not really what's going on here. That is being used as a cover to achieve a different goal. Their number one goal here, to remove Stallman as the head of the GNU Foundation. Why? Now, this is where we start to collide this in with why they're anonymous. The motivation for the writing of this particular report is the reason why they're anonymous. I'm going to go ahead and put that out there right now. Let's go ahead and read something here, because I think this begins to put everything in light. Not that. We'll come back to that. This is an article written quite some time back by Eben Moglen, who is no longer really with the Free Software Foundation. But he wrote this article entitled "Why the Free Software Foundation Gets Copyright Assignments from Contributors." Now, how this works is this. If you are a part of the GNU project, you sign a contributor license agreement, a CLA, which states that all of the code that you contribute to the GNU projects, right? That copyright for that code is owned by the GNU project and the FSF, not by you, right? So the head of the GNU project is the person who could change the license, right? So all of the code under the GNU project, and there's a lot of projects in there, including compilers and text editors, BIOSes and bootloaders and everything. There's a ton of critical infrastructure projects in the GNU project, tons of them, ones that we rely on and throughout Linux systems and many other operating systems every single day. It is under the GPL license. If Richard Stallman and the leadership of the GNU project wanted to, because they contain all of the copyrights, they could relicense the entirety of those projects under whatever license they want, including proprietary software licenses, anytime they want from that point going forward. The only thing stopping that from happening is the wishes of the people who can make that decision, which is, in this case, Richard Stallman. So because that copyright is held right there, and Richard Stallman is still the chief nuisance, as he calls himself, the top dog, the head honcho, the big cheese, the big kuna, he gets to make the call of keeping everything under the GPL. What if you don't want some of that code to be under the GPL? What if you want to use some of that code in a non-GPL'd way? What if you would like to be able to get a sub-license for it where it's relicensed under the BSD license, or as just simply a proprietary license where it is granted to someone? What if you would like to sell those sell license deals for some of those projects, which again deal with compilers and editors and operating suites and BIOSes and everything? What if you would like to do that? You need Richard Stallman to be gone. That is, in my opinion, one of the few real good, clear pieces of motivation I can see for wanting to make sure you remove Richard Stallman, right? Because then you can get someone else in there. And note, they are very clear. They don't just want to remove Richard Stallman. They want to remove a large enough portion of the Free Software Foundation board of directors and Richard Stallman all at the same time, while at the same time prohibiting specific individuals from even voting on who the new leadership might be. So with that large enough group kicked out, those 4 members of the board and Richard Stallman gone, they can then effectively, in entirety, control the Free Software Foundation and the GNU project. This is a hostile takeover. This is an attempt to push forward a hostile takeover of these organizations. It seems brutally obvious to me. That's absolutely what this is. We've seen these similar sorts of tactics play out in a wide number of open source projects and foundations over the last couple of years. This is play by play. Now, the Stallman-report.org utilizes a lot of very real and easy to verify, because it's on public websites, criticism of Richard Stallman to attempt to accomplish the goal. But that does not change the fact that the goal clearly is to get new leadership into the Free Software Foundation and the GNU project. And I don't, being as people aren't putting their names on it, that suggests very strongly that they really don't want you knowing they're behind it. Right? Because if they were proud of this, they'd put their names on it. If they were themselves going to be running for the Free Software Foundation board, or simply ascending to the top level of the GNU project, and they really felt that they had people behind them on this, and there wasn't, you know what I mean, like it was going to work out well, they would put their names on this, because that would be part of their election platform. But they're not doing that. They're keeping themselves completely silent on the matter. Or not silent, but anonymous on the matter. They're keeping themselves secret. Now, we know a few things about them. The Stallman Report individuals created a Mastodon account, a Fediverse account called @report_press. And they stated over on Mastodon, I'm just going to read a little bit to you now. They didn't post all that much, but it gives you a little bit of an insight into who these people are. We, the anonymous editors of the Stallman Report, have published our investigation of Richard Stallman and the Free Software Foundation today to a general audience. Our report exhaustively catalogs, analyzes, and offers a rebuttal of Richard Stallman's political program of sexual violence, catalogs credible allegations of misconduct, and documents the misconduct of the FSF circa 2019 and 2021. Please read and share our work. Now, if you scroll down a little bit, someone called out that Richard Stallman is NB-phobic, which means, I think, basically that if someone who's like afraid of people who use like they, them pronouns or something like that, I think that's what that means. The Stallman Report authors responded, "We were aware of this when preparing the report, and we have non-binary researchers on our team." The Stallman Report was written, according to the authors, by multiple non-binary individuals. They ultimately agreed that it was not necessary to include in the report. There were some other things which were left on the cutting room floor too. For instance, Stallman makes a lot of eugenics-adjacent remarks that were decided not to catalog. Interesting that they decided not to catalog Stallman's views on eugenics. What does that tell you about what they personally feel? However, we did address the transphobic GNU kind communication guidelines in our calls to action at the end of the report. And I'm going to go on and read their statement around the GNU kind communication guidelines, because this is fascinating and shows you their personal political views. It's subtle, but the guidelines, this is their quote, Quote, it's subtle, but the guidelines were written by Stallman in accordance with his views on objecting to the use of they, them as a singular third-person pronoun, and the GNU guidelines carefully make room for misgendering on this premise if the speaker uses, quote, words whose meanings, as you understand them, cover those participants' stated gender identities, end quote. You being the speaker rather than the person whose gender identity is being expressed, this is deliberate. Now, the GNU Kind Communication Guidelines, you can go read them at gnu.org. It's one of their philosophy documents. And the top of it is as reads as such. The GNU project encourages contributions from anyone who wishes to advance the development of the GNU system, regardless of gender, race, ethnic group, physical appearance, religion, cultural background, and any other demographic characteristics, as well as personal political views. Let's go down here. Here we go. Please think about how to treat other participants with respect, especially when you disagree with them. For instance, call them by the names they use and refer to them using words whose meanings, as you understand them, cover those participants' stated gender identities. Please also show tolerance and respect for people who do that, using different words from the words you use. Okay, so the problem here, according to the according to the authors of StallmanReport.org, is that that's transphobic because it provides an out for people who don't want to use they, them pronouns or zir, zim pronouns or whatever. And so it just says that we should just assume everyone has good intentions and do our best to be nice to each other and move on. That is not enough for them. For the authors of this report, which consists of multiple, at least two non-binary they, them people, they want to have this all redone so that it is more non-binary and trans-centric, right? And that people who violate and say they're I don't know, who commit transgenocide by using the wrong pronouns, you know how they say it, that those people can be jettisoned from the project, right? Because then they'll have a weapon to use against people for using the wrong words. Whereas currently in the Free Software Foundation or the GNU project, there doesn't exist that weaponry. They want that weaponry to exist. And it all seems to be focused around getting people out of the project. Whether the hard motivation for that is purely political, they want to take over another project and make it more politically in their image, whether they have a personal vendetta against Stallman, which if this is the people I think, that may be very possible. Or whether there's more monetary or power-related motivations at play here, where if they can get Richard Stallman out of both the Free Software Foundation, along with those 4 additional board members, and get him out of the GNU project, they can take over and start relicensing things like GCC and Emacs and everything else. And that I find the most interesting. I'm going to scroll up here for a little bit here. I want to read to you one example of the misconduct that Richard Stallman is alleged to have. And this is just one example. There's a lot more on here, but I want to read it to you here because I think it showcases the problems with this attack on Richard Stallman. All right, so now Richard Stallman has these things that are business cards that they've dubbed to be a pleasure card, right? So Richard Stallman has these business cards that says that he likes to share good books, good food, and exotic music and dance and tender embraces, and he has an unusual sense of humor. It's like I don't know, it's like a dating profile on a business card, right? And this is part of how he seems to pick up ladies, or at least he tries to. Well, this is one woman's recounting of her encounter with Richard Stallman. Quote, I was at one of my first events as a speaker. At the speaker's dinner, Stallman was there and he approached me to chat. He spent a few minutes talking about himself, showing no interest in me or what I was working on. He didn't ask about my work or my situation, he just wanted to pick me up. I got the impression that he just assumed that he was entitled to my attention based on his fame and reputation. He hit on me for a few minutes and handed me his card, his pleasure card, and then told me he would be around later that evening. I just thought, yeah, and I'll be hanging around with my spouse and kid. He moved to touch my arm and I backed off and avoided him for the rest of the event. I didn't even feel like he was particularly attracted to me. I felt like I was just a woman under 40 and that was enough. Okay. All right. There are multiple stories like this. And the more you talk to people who know Richard, who have hosted Richard at events, who have spent a lot of time working with Richard, you can find an ever-increasing number of stories like this. Stories which are, in my opinion, deeply embarrassing for Richard because it doesn't make him look great. It makes him look sad and desperate and awkward and kind of weird and kind of disregarding of other people and et cetera, right? But what it doesn't show is him, attacking people. It doesn't show him engaging. I wouldn't consider that to be sexual misconduct. I consider that to be awkward. I fully understand why that woman, and I'm sure many others, have just gone, I'm going to avoid this guy for the rest of the evening. Pretty reasonable. Why that could be used to force him out of the board of directors and out of the head position of a project which he created, that boggles my mind a little bit. But yet when you go out and you go to various social networks right now where this Stallman-report.org is being talked about, you quickly start to find people who were like, oh man, I read that. Yeah, he should be kicked out, because they read statements like that, or statements that Richard Stallman posted to his website, none of which are crimes, none of which are people who were assaulted. They're just, right? Now, as I've said, right from the start of this and for years prior, I've had many criticisms of Richard. I continue to have many criticisms of Richard. And many of those criticisms are repeated in here. In fact, some of this document reads like they were watching old Lunduke related podcasts and reading old Lunduke articles. However, those are not reasons to engage in a coup to force Richard out. And the way this is being done, the wording on which this is being done, and the motivation that seems to be at play here, honestly, it seems pretty dark. It is a clear political takeover. And I think it needs to be viewed in that light. Now, I've asked the authors of this report to reveal themselves, to say who they are, to sit down and have a conversation with me. They have not responded. I've reached out every which way I possibly can. They don't provide a lot of options. And there's been nothing. There's been absolutely nothing. I would say that in this particular case, because there is no real potential for backlash against them in terms of employment, because most companies in the tech industry I'm aware of are not big fans of Richard Stallman. Most tech foundations I'm aware of are run by individuals who hate Richard Stallman and dislike him. And many of the people running those foundations, the quotes from this article are from them, right? So there's not a lot of reason to stay private on this, right? Unless your goals are somewhat nefarious, right? That's the only real reason, is if the goals are going to make you look bad, or if they're somewhat nefarious. And I think that's clearly the case here. I mean, we'll find out. We'll find out as time goes on. But this is going to get some traction, right? The authors behind this Stallman report did state that they worked with multiple journalists providing them with advance copies to fine tune it with them, right? So they're working with tech journalists to create this and to help hide the identities of the people involved, to like make sure that nothing is coming out that can help identify them. They didn't do that great of a job. We know there's 2 non-binary or more non-binary people involved. And we know a couple other facts from this document that I won't divulge just yet because I'm still trying to verify a few things. But that also tells us that multiple tech journalists, and we'll see who begins to report on this the most heavily in the coming days, were involved in the creation of this, which suggests that the tech journalists themselves are behind some of the motivations for whatever they're trying to accomplish. Which I think after we've gone through all of this so far, I think you, I, and everyone else has a pretty good idea of what their goals are. I'm not going to tell the Free Software Foundation or the GNU Project what to do. That's not my job. However, I think considering the motives of the people behind the Stallman report, and considering that they have not operated in good faith, they have tried to keep things as secret as possible for their identity to protect whatever their ulterior motives are, whether it's personal vendetta, political change within organizations, or something more related to the licensing potentially of GNU projects, or monetary gain via the Free Software Foundation. I think it's good for the Free Software Foundation board to bear all of that in mind before making any rash decisions, personally. Now, and again, if you're out there, ask people, if they post this, if people post about this and talk about this, ask them who wrote it and why, not what they think. Not, oh, there's some anonymous person being altruistic and having good intentions. That's clearly not the case. Who are they and why did they write it? I mean, check this out. You go to their get their Whois result on stallman-report.org. Everything is redacted for privacy. What's their phone number? Redacted for privacy. What's the registrant country? Great Britain. What? Interesting. Registrant state or province? West Yorkshire. Everything else is redacted for privacy, but we do know a couple things. Anyway, this is fascinating in that these sorts of attacks come around against Stallman every so often. The last time they came around, they were filled with half-truths where some things were real against Stallman and other things were kind of made up or misconstrued. This time around, the majority of this attack on Stallman, which is most definitely a hit piece, the facts are real. The description of the facts, calling things in some very extreme terms in here, those don't really fit with the actual quotes and the actual statements and eyewitness accounts and whatnot. That doesn't really. There's lots of criticism to be levied at Stallman in here, who is, I should point out again, a very old man who is suffering from cancer. And anyone who has seen Richard Stallman recently, he's very frail looking. He is being attacked rather ruthlessly in this regard. And it doesn't make whoever the authors are look good, in my opinion. It just doesn't. But will we find out for sure who the authors are? I don't know. But the Lunduke Journal's working on it. Again, thank you to the Lunduke Journal subscribers, lunduke.com, lunduke.locals.com. Again, ask people. If you see people out there talking about this, ask them who is behind it, because I think it is important that we find out who the specific individuals are, all of them, not so that we can harass them, but so that we can understand what the motivation here is, what companies are behind them, what organizations are behind them, and what the motivations are. We need to know that. In fact, if those people want to come on this show, I will interview them. I will let them speak whatever they want to speak. I will not edit the things that they say, and I will publish their statements in their entirety because I want them to be heard. But I also want their motivations to be understood, because I think it's really important beyond just this little report. With that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.